As the war between the Republic of Texas and Mexico raged to the south, a different kind of war was raging in the Texas Hill Country just outside of Austin. This war between the Texas Rangers and the Comanche would be waged for decades and see some of the most ruthless, brutal fighting ever conducted on the whole of the North American continent. Tonight, join History at the OK Corral as we examine one of the most horrific stories from this war in the Battle of Walnut Creek. Austin, Texas, January 1836. Roughly 10 miles east of the burgeoning city, near a stretch of cedar and open prairie on the Colorado River known as Hornsby's Bend, a group of Texas Rangers pull their horses to a stop as the sun begins to set. They are hungry, cold, and tired after a long day of patrolling the surrounding areas for the dreaded Comanche raiding parties that hold virtually all of central Texas in terror. The days prior have been stormy, rainy, and frigid. All among them are looking for a good meal and a good night's rest. But just as the men are settling into their camp, they hear a faint cry in the distance. Every man among them strains their eyes to the east, searching for any sign of movement in the fading twilight. Then, suddenly, a young woman, her tattered clothes barely hanging on to her bruised and battered body, and weeping in distress, crawls over the banks of the river only yards away from the camp. She is so distraught, stricken with equal parts grief, terror, and relief, that she cannot speak. She merely crawls towards the Rangers as the Rangers rush out to meet her and carry her back to camp. For several minutes, the young woman sobs uncontrollably, unable to give the Rangers even her name. Finally, after several long minutes, she manages, in between long, panicked breaths, to tell the Rangers who she is and how she came to be here. Her name is Mrs. Hibbins. A few days prior, she had been traveling with her husband, her brother, and her 2 small children up the Guadalupe River, some 40 miles away, to their homestead near Gonzales. They had been not far from their destination when they were attacked by a roving band of Comanche warriors. Her husband and brother had been killed, and herself and her 2 young children had been taken captive. This was the norm for Comanche raiding, as any fighting-age male would either be killed outright or tortured to death as punishment for their incursion on Comanche lands. The women and children would often be taken prisoner. The Comanche, a relatively small tribe in numbers, were particularly receptive to the adoption of new members into their tribe, be they from other tribes or of Texan or Mexican origin. This, however, did not mean that captives were treated kindly or even humanely. Assaults of all kinds were regular and expected amongst female captives. Adult women were often forced into servitude, acting as equal parts laborer and concubine to their captor and his family. They could, eventually, be adopted into the tribe and even marry and raise families of their own, though their initiations into tribal society often came at the end of lengthy periods of subjugation and abuse. Children, in large part, would be adopted into Comanche families, often seen as recompense or replacement for sons and daughters lost to warfare and disease. After the initial torturous ordeal of their capture and subsequent days of hard riding, where they would be subject to severe thirst, hunger, and sunburn, the child would eventually be accepted as a full-fledged member of the tribe, eligible for the highest status as a warrior or a wife. Mrs. Hibbins was undoubtedly aware of these practices, as tales of Comanche captives had flooded the area in recent months, alongside the dispatches reporting on the movements and engagements of Santa Anna's army. She had been unable to quiet her youngest, only an infant, and after several hours of travel, an annoyed Comanche warrior had simply snatched the child from her arms and summarily executed him right in front of her. Seeing no other means of saving her other child, she had left him in camp as she slipped away into the night and attempted to make her way to Austin in search of help. She had scrambled through the prairies under the cover of night until she had reached the Colorado River, then made her way west towards Austin, knowing all the while that should she be recaptured, she would surely be killed. Now, despite her overwhelming grief, the young mother conveys her sole concern: the safety and recovery of her only remaining child. She describes in granular detail her child's physical appearance, the mule that he is riding, and the last known location of the Comanche camp, in a cedar brake not far from Austin. While a few of the younger rangers remain in camp in order to care for the emotionally and physically drained Mrs. Hibbins, the remainder now hurriedly resaddle their horses and take to the trail in search of the Comanche camp. After traveling along the Colorado River to find a suitable crossing spot, the rangers wait until first light, and then hastily make their way across the river and into the cedar-strewn hills outside of Austin. Among this pursuing party of rangers is a young Texan named Noah Smithwick. Though still in his early 20s, he has garnered considerable respect and esteem already for his deeds in battle against the Comanche. Even his early time with the Rangers has provided him with a thorough, invaluable understanding of Comanche tactics and strategies, and he believes that the Comanche will likely still be in the area and that a rescue of Mrs. Hibbins' young son may indeed be possible. The following is an excerpt from his personal account of the events that occur next, as the Rangers make their pursuit of the raiding party. Quote, "As soon as it was light enough, our scouts were out and soon found the trail, fresh and well-defined, as if the marauders were exercising neither haste nor caution in their retreat, having no doubt spent a good portion of the previous day in a fruitless search for their escaped prisoner. They did not seem to be at all alarmed as to the consequences of her escape, and it was about 10 o'clock in the morning when we came upon them, just as they were preparing to break camp. Taken completely by surprise, they broke for the shelter of a cedar brake, leaving everything except the weapons that they hastily snatched as they started. I was riding a fleet horse, which, becoming excited, carried me right in among the fleeing savages, one of whom jumped behind a tree and fired on me with a musket, fortunately missing his aim. Unable to control my horse, I jumped off him and gave chase to my assailant on foot, knowing his gun was empty. I fired on him and had the satisfaction of seeing him fall. My blood was up, and leaving him for dead, I ran on, loading my rifle as I ran, hoping to bring down another. As Smithwick charges forward, his hat is knocked off of his head by a low-hanging branch. With the fight now raging in the confines of the cedar brake, a fellow ranger mistakes Smithwick, with his dark hair and bare head, for a Comanche warrior. Within milliseconds, the ranger has Smithwick's form fully within the iron sights of his rifle. A disastrous friendly fire incident is only avoided at the last moment, when another ranger recognizes Smithwick and physically pushes the barrel of the ranger who is about to unwittingly shoot him into the dirt. Meanwhile, the warrior whom Smithwick has shot and presumed dead is, in fact, very much still alive and very much still dangerous. As Ranger Captain John Tumlinson fires on the scattering Comanche force from atop his horse, the wounded Comanche warrior manages to load a final shot into his rifle and fire upon him. The shot narrowly misses Tumlinson, instead striking and killing his horse. As the ranger captain struggles to free himself from underneath the body of his freshly killed mount, another ranger named Conrad Rohrer manages to wrench the weapon from the warrior's hands and kill the wounded man with several vicious blows to the head. At the same time, across the campsite, the Comanche have managed to hurriedly wrap the Hibbins boy in a large buffalo robe and set him atop a different mule from the one he had been riding. Now, as the din and chaos of the battle reigns all around, the mule with the captive boy on its back makes a mad dash to follow along with the remainder of the fleeing Comanche. Conrad Rohrer and another ranger, their blood hot from the fight, now break off in pursuit of the retreating party. At the rear of this party rides the young, terrified Hibbins. In a sickening few moments, the Rangers, guns drawn, ride up behind Hibbins, whom they presume to be a fleeing Comanche. Eager to dispatch any Comanche that they can, Rohrer aims squarely at the back of the Hibbins boy and pulls the trigger. The gun misfires. With their mounts still galloping their way through the thick cedar and maneuvering across the rocky ground, Rohrer attempts to clear the jam in his weapon and then again aims squarely at the buffalo-robed draped youngster and again pulls the trigger. Again, the weapon misfires. For a second time, Rohrer attempts to fix his malfunctioning weapon from the saddle before taking aim again. But just before he is able to fire, his comrade notices that the rider of the mule is, in fact, the Hibbins boy. Seeing this, he pulls Rohrer's arm just as the man is squeezing the trigger on his third shot. This time, the weapon does not misfire, as a resounding crack deafens the Rangers and gun smoke fills the air. However, the shot misses, as the bullet sails over the head of the Hibbins boy. In Smithwick's own words, quote, "Providence seemed to have interposed to save him." The Rangers pull the mule to a halt, and, despite having skirted disaster, their mission is complete. The remaining Comanche are left to recede into the west of the hill country, as the Rangers convene to take stock of the damage done and concur on their next course of action. It is quickly decided that they will make the 10-mile trek to Austin in order to return the likely traumatized child to his much aggrieved mother. But first, there is the grisly business of harvesting what the Rangers hold as their rightful war trophies. In the expanses of the Texas frontier, even in these early iterations of their existence, the Rangers have learned quickly to adapt and adopt many of the same tactics, strategies, and customs of their avowed enemies. In the Comanche culture, it is held that a warrior is rightly entitled to the scalp of any foe that he has slain. In a culture dependent on hunting, raiding, and warfare, these trophies were not merely symbols of spite or superiority, but social currency, a testament to a warrior's deeds in a land where martial prowess was, largely, the only thing that mattered. In a twist of irony that is all too common in the history of warfare, the culture of the Rangers, molded by the same environment, as well as their own experiences and personal animus, was shaped much by the very same sentiments. Thus, by 1836, the taking of scalps has become commonplace amongst their ranks. Noah Smithwick, having shot and killed one of the warriors himself, is pressed upon by the others to take his rightful trophy. His account of the interaction follows, quote, "The boys held an inquest upon the dead Comanche and, deciding that the gunshot would have proven fatal, awarded me the scalp. I modestly waived my claim in favor of Conrad Rohrer, but he, generous soul, declared that, according to all rules of the chase, the man who brought down the game was entitled to the pelt, and himself scalped the warrior, tying the loathsome trophy to my saddle where I permitted it to remain, thinking it might afford the poor woman whose family its owner had helped to murder some satisfaction to see the gory evidence that one of the wretches had paid the penalty for his crime." Now, with the Hibbins youngsters safely in their custody and their bloodied, fleshy trophies swinging from their saddles, the Rangers make their way south from Walnut Creek to the city of Austin. Smithwick gives his account of the touching scene that follows, as the Rangers ride back into the city and return the lost child to his mother. Quote, "Late in the afternoon we rode into the station in triumph. There was a suspicious moisture in Minnie and I, long since a stranger to tears, when the overjoyed mother clasped her only remaining treasure to her heart. And I could not help but steal a glance at Rohrer and try to imagine what his feeling would have been had not his guns refused to obey his murderous behests. At first, the child is too overwhelmed with grief and exhaustion to even recognize his own mother. But soon, the child is calmed and realizes his newfound safety. This pair, now having lost everyone in their family but each other, console one another with their mere presence, as words seem incapable of expressing the simultaneous gravity, sorrow, and gratitude of the moment. However horrific, this scene is not at all rare on the Texas frontier. Even in this year of 1836, in the midst of the Texas Revolution, and only months before the events of the Battle of the Alamo, the greatest threat to most settlers in Texas is not General Santa Anna and the Mexican army, but the mighty, often seemingly unconquerable Comanche. Though the Rangers have succeeded in retrieving the young hostage and in rescuing his mother, instances of such victories have proven exceedingly rare in previous years. As a perpetually undermanned and underfunded fighting force armed with single-shot rifles and pistols, and relegated largely to learning frontier fighting tactics on the fly, the Rangers have paid, and will continue to pay, a heavy price in lives and casualties. Nearly every lesson learned by the young Ranger force is one paid for in blood. Conversely, while they are indeed snugly situated in their seat as the lords of the southern plains, the Comanche are experiencing monumental losses of their own. During the 1830s, large swaths of the tribe are decimated by smallpox. The Comanche, unable to deduce the source of the dreaded disease, would see thousands of their already relatively small tribe perish to the epidemic. The shifting geopolitical forces in Texas would prove another blow to the Comanche at this most inopportune time, as the policies of later Texas governors like Mirabeau Lamar would call not only for a more offensive approach to dealing with the Comanche and other native tribes, but their outright extermination. The Texas Revolution would conclude on April 21st of 1836, and while the bloodshed between Texas and Mexico would cease, the fighting between the Rangers and the Comanche would now only intensify. As their numbers continue to dwindle, the Comanche's resolve to hold onto their expansive territories will only be further steeled. The Texas Rangers will continue to fight not only against Comanche raiders and hill country bandits, but against the Texas government itself, as pleas from Ranger officers for greater supplies of men, ammunition, and weapons would often go unheeded by the cash-strapped administrations. They will be disbanded and subsequently reconvened numerous times in the coming decade, as Texas morphs from republic to official U.S. statehood. In the 1840s, however, with the advent of New Jersey gunsmith Samuel Colt's new 5- and then 6-shot revolvers, the nature of warfare in Texas would be changed forever. It would be veteran Ranger Samuel Walker who would take it upon himself to travel to New York to meet with Colt in New York City. Here, the two men would discuss changes that could be made to the initial design to better suit it for use by the Rangers. Though Walker would perish only months later during his service in the Mexican-American War, the firearm he helped design would go on to change the very nature of the way his comrades conducted their very violent business. For his part, Smithwick would continue his service with the Rangers into the 1840s. He would marry Thurza M. Blakey in 1839 before moving to what is today Weberville, Texas. In the 1860s, after receiving notable opposition for his pro-unionist views, Smithwick would move himself and his family to Kern County, California. Though his wife would pass away in 1871, Smithwick would live to age 91, passing away in Santa Ana, California in the year 1899. But the many stories from the life of Noah Smithwick, as well as the countless tales of Comanche bravery and brutality, and the innumerable tales of rescue and revenge on the Texas frontier, are, for tonight, other stories for other times. Thank you for joining us on History at the OK Corral. If you like this story, click on one of the videos on your screen now to watch more. Also, if you'd like to learn more about Old West history, be sure to sign up for the HOKC newsletter. Link is in the description. Thank you again for watching, and we'll see you next time on History at the OK Corral, home of history's greatest shootouts and showdowns.